Well, good morning. Welcome to the International Space Medicine Summit. We're very pleased to have you here with us this morning. And I'm going to turn the program over to Ambassador Derision. Ambassador Derision is the first founding director of the Baker Institute. He had a very distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service, served as the Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle Eastern Affairs, and served as the ambassador both to Israel and to Syria. And we're very fortunate to have him with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much, George, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all the attendees of the 8th International Space Medicine Summit. That's an important number. We've held 8 of these incredibly productive space medicine summits, which I think the substantive output in terms of public policy for dealing with space policy has been very, very productive. The summit has become one of the world's premier international meetings on space medicine, and the Baker Institute is very pleased to serve along with Baylor College of Medicine as the host for the summit. We welcome the representatives with us this morning from all of our International Space Station ISS partners, Canada, Europe, Japan, and Russia. And we are particularly pleased to have representatives with us today from India's human spaceflight programs. So thank you for joining us as we discuss the research needed to enable human exploration beyond Earth orbit. The road to the human exploration of space lies through the space station. Understanding the effects of zero gravity on the human body and developing the protocols to alleviate these effects on the station is a critical step, as you all very well know, for enabling human exploration. With plans being made to return humans to the moon and eventually land humans on Mars, there must be much more research to prevent and mitigate the medical, psychological, and biomedical challenges spacefarers will face. The International Space Station provides an excellent laboratory in which to conduct the required research. The station, however, has a finite lifetime, and it is essential that it be utilized now to its fullest potential through cooperative studies and a sharing of equipment and instruments between the international partners. The sharing and application of the lessons learned from the long-duration human spaceflight and here on Earth with analog research environments will not only lead to advances in technology and human knowledge to protect future space travelers, but will also help enhance life on Earth. The space station is an excellent example of what can be achieved by working together towards common goals and objectives. I'm old enough to remember back in 1972 when Leonid Brezhnev and Richard Nixon held their summit in Moscow. It was the first time an American president had visited the Soviet Union since the beginning of the Cold War. That summit produced a number of unprecedented agreements. The most significant was the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or the SALT Agreement. At the same summit, Brezhnev and Nixon also agreed to joint American-Soviet space mission. After 15 years of intense competition in space, an Apollo capsule and a Soyuz spacecraft would dock together in space to demonstrate a common docking system, which would be developed by the two nations and which would be used in future to enable rescues in space in case of an emergency. Now, that joint mission turned out to be very successful. But beyond the successful flight demonstration, its real success was in proving that the two nations could be partners and not just adversaries. The relationships that were established on the Apollo-Soyuz test project in turn helped to provide the foundations for the highly successful cooperation that has become the hallmark of our partnership with Russia on the International Space Station. And that partnership is really much more than just a relationship between Russia and the United States. Canada, Europe, and Japan are all shareholders in that partnership, and the space station has truly become an international endeavor. 52 years ago this September, President John F. Kennedy gave a very historic speech right here on the Rice University campus. In his speech, he said, quote, "There is no strife, no prejudice, No national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. Today, on the International Space Station, we are making the peaceful cooperation he spoke of some 50 years ago a reality. Partner nations have and will continue to have differences, but our relationships in space should arise beyond those differences. It is important that our cooperation in space transcend these differences and the politics and rhetoric here on Earth. I hope we are all up to this strategic challenge. As we continue to explore space, we need to do it together, building on our space station relationships. So I wish you every success with the summit and with all your deliberations over the next 3 days. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And again, I'd like to welcome you all here for 3 days of deliberations, and we're very pleased to have you here. I think we put together a very interesting agenda, and hopefully we'll address topics that will be of great interest to you all. And I think we have some excellent panel members, and I'm looking forward to some real good discussions over the next couple days. But I think, unfortunately, the Chinese were unable to make the meeting, but as Ambassador Dirigen said, the Indians will be here and are here, so we'll be very pleased to have them join us as well. So welcome, and let me turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Alfred.
Well, thank you, Mr. Abbey, and let me say at the very beginning, this meeting is one that I think has had a great deal of energy behind it, and over the years, I think that energy has been the important thing that has guided the continuous knowledge base that comes from this. I've been asked to make some welcome remarks to you on your being here for this important summit. And I want to tell you how important this is, not only just to the Rice University, but to Baylor College of Medicine as well, which is one of the partners with Rice. And then I learned that as I was looking at the program, which always begins anew after the old program ends, and literally within a week, the organizing committee begins to work on the next year's program. And that is a measure, I think, of how intimate these developments are, and how essential they are for this program. As a matter of fact, there are over 52 participants that are institutional participants that have some impact in the organization of the summit each year. And it's grown substantially over the years. If many of you were here for the first ISMS meeting, and now we're here after 8 years, and you can see the expansion and the strength that has evolved from this particular effort. Having said that, and knowing that we have had some delay in time this morning, those basically are all the remarks that I have to make. Ambassador Dirigen actually touched on some critical things in the history of space flight, and he, I think, better than anyone else, described those developments over the years and what their meaning was. and how, in fact, Rice University played a major part in this evolution. So with that, I welcome you on behalf of the institutions, particularly Rice University and Baylor College of Medicine, and on behalf of all the members of the Planning and Organization Committee and all the workers in the space program that are attached to this effort, and for which the effort here from this International Space Medicine Summit transfers to important developments and advances in the program, not only as the program, but also as individuals, and also as the people who are our citizens in our everyday world of survival and enjoying each other. So with that, I will close and thank you all very much for being here. And I hope you'll find that this is the kind of program that you want to participate in. And as at the end of the year, or the end of the program, you'll receive from us some requests for information about your opinion and what the program has meant to you. Those evaluations are extremely important, so we urge you to participate in responding and submitting them. But thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Bobby. Yes, all the panels that we have put together, I think we have some good speakers, and we don't have any formal PowerPoint presentations, and that was done purposely. We'd like to encourage a lot of interaction with the audience, so as we have these panels, we want you to feel free to ask questions and interact with the panelists. We're very fortunate this morning to have, I think, an excellent keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Neil Lane. Dr. Lane started out his career as an assistant professor here at Rice University a number of years ago, became a professor, and then he also became provost of Rice University and served as provost for 6 years. He then went off and became director of the National Science Foundation and was an ex officio member of the National Science Board. He left the National Science Foundation and became the science advisor to President Clinton and served in that capacity very well and interacted with NASA and the space program during those years. And then returned to Rice, and he's a Malcolm Gillis Professor of Physics here at Rice University, and also a senior fellow here at the Baker Institute. And we're very pleased to have him here at the Baker Institute, pleased that he's here at Rice again. Let me turn it over to Neil.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, George, for the introduction. I want to add my welcome to Rice University and to the Baker Institute and tell you really how overwhelmed I am, actually, to be speaking to this distinguished body. Men and women from all over the world who actually know a lot about space. In fact, so many of you have been there. The cumulative number of human space years collected together in this room really is quite intimidating. I'm not a space expert, of course, but I had some experience, as George indicated, when I was in the White House working with President Clinton. And as his science advisor, you get to see these things from the perspective of the White House. It was fascinating, actually. It was the closest I ever got to low Earth orbit. I even had a chance to join NASA Administrator Dan Golden, who many of you know, and fly the shuttle simulator, and I landed it, almost. The runway needed to be a little bit wider. I think those of you who've done that sort of understand what I mean, but I gave it a good shot. I also was hosted, very delighted to be hosted by former Senator John Glenn at Johnson Space Center when he was in training for his first shuttle flight, and he treated me to an astronaut lunch with a very popular shrimp cocktail, and he explained the value of shrimp cocktail. I think he also said that astronauts tend to steal shrimp cocktail from one another. I was sorry to hear that. I mean, and it's not widely publicized, no press here, but it was actually a very good shrimp cocktail. On the policy side, of course, I dealt with budgets, and those are the years when we were getting the space station up, and so especially, of course, with our Russian colleagues, getting the service module up, there were lots of policy issues connected with that. It really was a fascinating time for me, and I enjoyed that interaction. Of course, you all know the history of the space program, and the ambassador told us something about that already this morning. Indeed, many of you played a critical part in that history. But I think it's good to reflect on it a little bit more. There's a lot to learn from history, and I think there's some lessons on the history of spaceflight and our international cooperation that could serve us well today. So let me say a little bit more about it. Of course, space became a hot topic in this country some 57 years ago, when the country was really shaken out of its technological complacency by an 80-pound aluminum ball orbiting overhead called Sputnik. The subsequent panic over here and the concern about losing the space race and falling behind in critical areas of technology induced the United States federal government to pour money, an enormous amount of money, when you think about it, into research in science and math education. Indeed, that Sputnik moment, as we talk about it here, sparked a much-needed revolution in American science and math education. The result has been a generation of scientists and engineers who not only gave us Apollo, they brought us into the information age. With our smartphones, our iPads, tablets, petascale computing, GPS, DNA sequencing, the internet and the cloud, and all of the things that are connected together now. When Sputnik was launched, I was a student in my first year, actually, at the University of Oklahoma, studying physics. I then got my PhD, went on to do theoretical physics, started a career in teaching and research here at Rice University. The 60s and 70s are wonderful times to be doing physics research. There were plenty of problems to do. There was money to be had. There were bright students. There were open faculty positions. All of that can be traced back to that Sputnik moment. So let me say a personal thank you for Sputnik. All of us were enthralled by the many advances and the discoveries that were being made in space. Man's first presence in space, Yuri Gagarin's historic flight in 1961, the landing on the moon in 1969, and 57 years have seen an impressive record of achievements in space exploration and science by the United States, by Russia, Japan, Canada, and many other nations. During the early Cold War years, progress in our space effort was driven by competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. But even then, there were those who saw the benefits of close cooperation between the two nations in space rather than intensifying a public go to the moon, rather than competition. And in September of 1963, 1 year after Kennedy's public go to the moon speech here in the football stadium the ambassador mentioned, the President spoke to the United Nations about the importance of international cooperation in space. And Kennedy said the following: "Finally, in a field where the United States and Soviet Union have a special capacity in the field of space, there's room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. Space offers no problems of sovereignty. By resolution of this assembly, the members of the United Nations have forsworn any claim to territorial rights in outer space or on celestial bodies and declared that international law and the United Nations Charter will apply. Why, therefore, shouldn't man's first flight to the moon be a matter of, why should it be a matter of national competition? Why should the United States and the Soviet Union, in preparing for such expeditions, become involved in immense duplications of research, construction, expenditure? Surely we should explore the possibility of scientists and astronauts of our two countries, indeed all the world, why we cannot work together in the conquest of space, sending someday in this decade to the moon, not the representatives of a single nation, but the representatives of all our countries." End of quote. On November 12th of that year, Kennedy signed a memo to NASA administrator requesting that NASA respond to send him proposals for broader cooperation between the United States and the USSR, including cooperation in lunar landing programs, with an interim report to be made on December 15th of 1963. President Kennedy was assassinated on November the 22nd and thus did not live to receive those proposals. We missed an extraordinary opportunity to consider joint lunar missions. But the advantages of cooperation were becoming clear. In 1969, NASA invited the European Space Research Organization, ESRO, the European Space Agency's predecessor organization, to participate in the post-Apollo program. Europe accepted and focused its efforts on building a module to be flown in the Space Shuttle's cargo bay called Space Lab. The Space Lab module had its first flight in 1983, and it flew a number of successful missions in the shuttle until 1998, when the space station superseded it as a space laboratory. Cooperation in the human spaceflight program with Canada was also initiated in '69, when NASA invited Canada to participate in the Space Shuttle program. A manipulator system was identified as an important component of the Space Shuttle, and a Canadian company had developed a very successful robot to load fuel into reactors. In 1975, the Canadian Research Council signed an agreement to develop and construct the shuttle remote manipulator system for the shuttle. The Canadarm, as it became known, proved to be an invaluable system on the space shuttle and proved to be critical in ensuring the successful assembly of the space station. In the early 1980s, when the plans for the space station were being formulated, Europe, represented by the European Space Agency, as well as Japan and Canada, were approached by NASA to become partners in the station. And in 1984, President Ronald Reagan directed NASA to develop a space station in cooperation with Canada, Europe, and Japan. Canada's contribution was this new and improved remote manipulator system for the station. The early 1970s saw the first real space cooperation between the two Cold War adversaries and competitors, the United States and the USSR, as the United States and Soviet Union agreed to work together to develop and demonstrate the common docking system in space, the ambassador mentioned earlier. In 1975, the two nations flew together in space for the first time on a very successful Apollo-Soyuz test project, or Soyuz-Apollo test project, depending on your point of view. The commanders of the two spacecraft have become lifelong friends, and this last week, I understand, Tom Stafford, the American commander, surprised his friend Alexei Leonov, the Soyuz commander, by suddenly appearing at Alexei's 80th birthday party in Moscow. Following the very successful Apollo-Soyuz test project, as the Cold War continued, cooperation between the scientific and technical communities of both nations also continued. And that relationship played a vital role, serving as a bridge between the United States and the Soviet Union, especially during times of crisis. These days, one often hears about science diplomacy or science and technology diplomacy. I doubt there are better examples than Apollo-Soyuz and all that followed. Cooperation in human spaceflight again became a reality in the early 1990s, when negotiations were held between the two nations that led to a Russian cosmonaut flying on the space shuttle in 1994, and Russia becoming a partner in the International Space Station. Phase one of the U.S.-Russian collaboration and partnership, the Shuttle Mir program, began in 1995. And U.S.-Russian cooperation in human spaceflight has now been going on continuously for over 20 years. During those 20 years, there have, of course, been differences between our two countries. It's most fortunate that those differences have not halted our close cooperation in space. Astronauts and cosmonauts, engineers and scientists have worked together to further human exploration of space with common goals and objectives. When the Space Shuttle Columbia was lost, it was Russia and Russian support that kept the International Space Station flying. And it is Russia today that provides the United States and our international partners human access to the station. Russia has proved to be a good and reliable partner in all our space endeavors. Today, the U.S. and Russia continue to have differences, and there are some in our country who are attempting to make our cooperation in space, in science, political. It'd be a huge mistake. Rolling back space and scientific cooperation would be counterproductive for both our countries as well as our other international partners. Looking to the future, international cooperation is vital as we consider missions of increasing complexity, such as human flights to Mars and perhaps returning to the moon. Given the capabilities of many countries and regions around the world, it makes little sense for the U.S. to try to go it alone in human spaceflight or space-based science, for that matter. Our traditional partners, Canada, Europe, Japan, and Russia, all represented here today. I'm sorry that it was not possible for the Chinese to be with us. A future event, I'm sure they will be able to come. This partnership has been critical to peaceful cooperation in space. We really need to expand that partnership. The challenges in the future are larger, perhaps, by some perspectives than even those we have met in the past. Without this larger, more inclusive international effort, including China, India, here present, Brazil, and perhaps other countries, it's hard to see how we're going to get to Mars, even by 2050, as the recently released National Academy's report suggests is a reasonable target given the current circumstances, let alone get back to the moon. So the International Space Station is perhaps the greatest international cooperative endeavor in the history of engineering, science, and technology. I applaud you and all who have worked with you for that achievement. And now this assembled summit of present and future partners faces a daunting challenge of ensuring that the station is utilized to its fullest potential by implementing cooperative studies, sharing equipment and instruments and knowledge to accomplish the advancements in technology and human knowledge that will not only protect future space travelers, will also enhance our life on Earth. It's a difficult task, but it's a rewarding and a very important one. I want to end with a speculation. It's no secret the U.S. is going through a period of political disharmony right now. I thought about what word to use. Disharmony was what thank you, Ambassador. Disharmony is what we call it. So we have our political parties at opposite poles in so many matters that not much really seems to be getting done right now in Washington. Our uncertain U.S. space policy is only one example. I'm often in Washington these days, and I can confirm that it's difficult to advance any good ideas very far. However, there are good people in Washington in both parties and in the various federal agencies. They're working hard. They care about the issues we're talking about today. Many of them determined to get back to serious policy matters, including science and space, and they're working behind the scenes for progress. In the midst of this, the American people are distracted by a number of worries: quality of their children's education, the cost of health care, job security, and wages. They're really not thinking much about science, space, or anything else that's not of an immediate concern. Perhaps you're seeing some of those sorts of reactions in your own countries as well. It's hard to be optimistic about the future of our space program right now, but I believe this troubled time will pass. People will begin to be excited about exploring the final frontier. Or maybe it's what Winston Churchill once said about us, paraphrasing: you can always count on the American people to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. So I'd like to make a suggestion. As you celebrate the past accomplishments in space and plan for the future, my advice is to be optimistic, is to be ambitious, with the expectation that future national leaders will again challenge us, in the Star Trek words, to go where no one has gone before. Nobody can predict what the world's going to be like in 20 years or even 10. One thing I think is clear: a good outcome for the world will depend on international cooperation in science and the exploration of our planet, and especially in the space that surrounds us. So I wish you every success with your deliberations over the course of these next 3 days. In the words of Luke Skywalker, the hero of another popular cult space movie, may the Force be with you all.
thank you very much, Neil. I think those are very encouraging words, and I think we should be optimistic. And so we're going to be optimistic and get this next panel underway. So if the panel members for the radiation panel will come take their places, we'll go ahead and get started.